Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Chausovsky, and welcome to the second episode of 3DM, the podcast, where we explore all things data and hopefully translated it to useful tools that you can apply in running your business better. Today is the 29th of March, and I am so delighted, so pleased to be joined by a former colleague and a data whiz extraordinaire, Madeline Glosemeyer from Deacero. Maddie, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So we're going to talk about how an individual company can leverage analytics and data insights in terms of running their business better. And there's nobody that's better positioned to talk about that than Maddie, because she is the commercial strategy manager, I believe, at
Yes, you got it.
And
Yes.
that's a very complicated title, but I'm sure you can tell us a little bit about what that means, and maybe a little bit about Deacero as well. Would you mind?
Yeah, so Deacero, it's a binational steel company, primarily steel wire products, but a lot of the production facilities are in Mexico. And as of, I want to say around 2014, Deacero Mexico made a huge push in kind of expanding their footprint into the United States. Now, as they did that, they kind of started with, a smaller team, and of course with the pandemic disruptions basically exploded their growth tremendously, especially with the supply chain disruptions, people trying to reconfigure their supply chains. And it kind of got to the point where they were trying to benchmark their performance, and they simply did not have really the manpower to do that. Because they do steel wire products, their footprint is anywhere from housing market related things, so single family, multifamily steel products. You can think anything from fasteners to reinforcement bars to steel stakes to things that go into bedding markets or even lawnmowers. So like a wire rod that's used to hang, a lawnmower basket, something as simple as that. They also do a lot of fencing products too. So agricultural fencing, horse fence, sheep and goat fence. And then we also have non-residential construction products. So really every single piece of the economic train, they have a footprint in, which on the one hand is really good in terms of diversification. On the other hand, for a commercial marketing team, it's kind of a lot for, say, one person to just do, or to do that on top of other responsibilities. So originally they were a client of mine, and then reached out to see if I could help out directly with their team. And so I kind of switched from that consulting role to more of a hands-on manufacturing role. So I help with anything from their strategic planning, which comes into like the budgeting process, also things when it comes to projects, helping to enable those projects, give them market insights, and basically feed them with intel so that they know when they go to customers kind of to have more of an informed conversation. And that's another piece we're now focusing on within our company, is how to improve relationships within our own customer base so that they can see us not only as a partner or a source, but really someone who's trusting them with data-driven decision making, which, ironically, the name of this podcast here.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting. There's so many different verticals that you touch on and segments of the economy. So when you go to analyze the impact of macroeconomic developments, how is it that you would go about in terms of mapping the things that you're looking at in your analysis to the Deacero products and to your customers? And talk a little bit about maybe some of the data sources that you tend to rely on most frequently.
Yeah, so to start off on the data sources I'm using, primarily it's publicly available data. So a lot of it stems from the Census Bureau and the Federal Reserve Board, primarily Fred. That's like the beacon of hope and light and truth of what's out there, because you can build dashboards from that. You can build heat maps off of that. They got a really good database that you can dig into there. Sometimes I'm looking at Bureau of Labor and Statistics if I'm trying to gauge like the employment market. And on non-residential construction trends, I'll use anything between the American Institute of Architects. They have that Architectural Billings Index. I'll also use the Dodge Momentum Index, the DMI, which kind of leads the non-residential construction market. And I'll also use Construct Connect. Construct Connect they publish their forecast. Construct Connect is very generous in terms of its value offering, even if you don't have a fully paid subscription with them. So from that collection of sources, though, you just get data. So you get data from like a 50,000 foot view. To your point, Alex, the hard thing is I noticed I'd give like macroeconomic presentations, and it almost felt like I was like an entertainer for an hour. Like, oh, that's neat. Cool.
Yes,
I have no idea. I have no idea what that means for me. Like, I need to know what the nail market forecast is, or I need to know what the horse panel forecast is. Well, there's
What's
no
a horse panel?
Exactly. Like to me, I don't even know what those, well, I know what a nail is, but I don't know like what a hog fence is, or like, down to we call them statistical groups, like our statistical group 3 product families. We have over 8,000 SKUs.
Wow.
So when I entered the organization, mentally, I'm the type of person where I want to know everything. And then when I found out we had like 8,000 SKUs, I was like, well, there's just no way. Like, there's no way I'm going to learn like how every product, where it goes. I just need to know what the big movers are. So that's where I started. Like, what are the largest product families by tonnage? And then I collaborated with each of the sales divisions. We have 5 sales divisions. We have a wholesaler, a retailer, manufacturing, direct construction, and then we also have true retail, which is selling actually to the end consumer. So between those divisions, I would meet with their managers and ask them by their product categories, hey, more or less, where do you think this is going to? Like, who's the consumer of this product? The hardest segment to do that with, obviously, is going to be the wholesale one, because you have no visibility. You're selling it to a distributor who's then selling it to a bunch of retail locations. You have no idea really where that visibility is very opaque. Now, when it comes, though, to something like direct construction, it's very easy. You're on the exact job site. You know what that job site is for. So it's very interesting. Like, I'd meet with a team like our wholesale team, and they were like plucking numbers out of the air. But I was pressing them. I was like, okay, do you think it's above 50% or below 50%? And even sometimes answering questions like that was very hard. But I would ask them, is it going like residential application? Okay, if it is residential application, good. That's a good baseline. Is it manufacturing application? Is it non-residential? And then from there, we try and funnel it down further and further. But with something like direct construction, it's very easy because they could pull up their direct sales by job site, and they could tell me, yeah, 21.7% of our rebar sales are going to solar projects. Wow. 22.8% is going to wind projects. Of course, the little data nerd in me loved talking to the direct construction team, did not like as much having to collaborate with people who really have no gauge. But at the end of the day, sometimes you do just have to build in an assumption if you're going to try and make more or less sense of where your sales are going to. Once we did that, once we mapped by product family where those things were going to, I would pool, and I still do this, I pool our sales by month and then try and see how the pie chart of our sales differ from month to month, which is very interesting because, like, before the Fed decided to make our lives very interesting and increase interest rates to the quickest pace they've done since the 1980s, looking at our residential construction market, it was, 40 to 50% of our sales. Now it's like down to a third. It's still our biggest market pool. That's why I always track the housing market, number one, because it's our biggest market pool, but number two, because it leads that economic train. So I'm always closely looking at what's happening to housing because that's that first domino to tell us everything else. But using that exercise by looking at where our products are going into kind of helped me, number one, with the understanding of what's most significant, and number two, being able to communicate that to leadership so they have a better understanding when I am showing trends, how that is truly going to impact us. So probably put more weight on housing than you say would maybe manufacturing, but still don't discount manufacturing because that's say maybe 10, 15% of our sales, something like that.
Right. So there's a couple of points you made there that I wanted to circle back on. First and foremost, I find it fascinating that you're a steel manufacturing company and you look at housing as a predictor of your activity. I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit. And then the second question is really more of a comment, which is to say that most companies that make something typically go to a market through the wholesale channel in some capacity, right? A portion of their business is going to be through distribution. And so they're all facing the same challenge of not knowing where their products end up. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how it is that you kind of work with the distribution guys, with the wholesale team, to fine tune it a little bit more beyond the just plus or minus 50%.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I will say the good news is, good news and bad news. So if you have, like in our case, we have a partner of ours that we've been with for, I think, over a decade, and they've been our largest consumer of, our wholesale division. Pro is you have a really good relationship with them. Con is you're too heavily concentrated with that one customer, and if they don't like you, that division basically gets obliterated. But that's,
Right.
A conversation for another day. Having a good partnership, though, does allow you to sometimes press a little bit more and ask, hey, can you tell me a little bit about like how these products are being used, where these products are going? I will say, because we have a diversified channel, where I would also sometimes, if they didn't give me good insights, what I would do is say, okay, I know at least for our retailer team, which sells to retail locations, I know they sell similar product families as you. Let me talk with them first, because they'll be able to kind of tell us, where those product families are ending up, and maybe there's some overlap where if you hear those numbers, then you can kind of go from there. Obviously, not every company is going to be in that position to where they have multiple footprints to kind of do that exercise, both from a top down and a bottom up perspective, but that's kind of some ways we got around it. Obviously, the other thing I do is I try and check in with them every quarter to kind of ask them, do you think that's still right? Did they tell you anything else? And to your point, Alex, some distributors, they don't want to tell you your customer list. They don't even really want to mention anything, because obviously they're going to be concerned that you're going to then go directly to those retailers. So
Right.
We've actually, the positive part about our business is we are being diversified. The negative part is it's extremely difficult to manage because of our footprint being both. So when you have, a wholesale division and a retail division, managing that and managing, those areas of boundaries can sometimes be a lot. The good news is we have our sales executive does a really good job of like communicating that to our division leads, and sometimes has to intermediate himself, but that's kind of how we've been able to navigate around that tripwire, if you will.
So I think you said two key elements there. Number one, which is rely on the relationship that you've established with your channel partners in order to press them a little bit and get maybe not to divulge who the customers are, but at least get a better understanding of how they see their own business breaking down, because it's going to be better than your understanding of how their business is breaking down.
Right.
And then the second element is regular check-ins in order to make sure that as the data evolves and the market segmentation shifts from quarter to quarter, you're keeping up with the changes in the marketplace. Was that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it will fluctuate. That is true.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other question I had was, as far as housing as a leading indicator for your business being in the steel industry, can you explain the rationale, and so that some companies understand that even though they might have nothing to do with housing, housing is still actually a good predictive indicator for their business?
Yeah, I mean, I started off with this company immediately telling them we're going to be looking at housing. I don't even know how important housing is to you, but we're going to be looking at housing just because it is that leading indicator. And I'm sure you know this, Alex, intimately well, but because it's that first mover, when mortgage rates change, that changes the affordability calculation. That affordability calculation changes how people feel, like sentiment-wise. And if they're going to pull the trigger on buying a house, guess what? They're going to pull the trigger also on furniture. They're going to pull the trigger on, Maybe they need a new hot water heater. Maybe they need more appliances. Maybe they need new plates and silverware and all of that other stuff, that ancillary consumption that is affiliated with a house, that then trickles in, of course, to manufacturing. So, of course, because we're a manufacturing company, I knew I wanted to look at housing regardless. Once I learned that a good chunk of our product portfolio included things like fasteners and plastic strip nails and collated nails, and as well as fences, chain link fences, wire that goes into dog kennels, which dog kennels, of course, would be affiliated with housing. Then I was like, okay, well, we need to be tracking this, regardless. Already because it was the first mover in the economic train, but also added significance because a lot of this is going into single family and multifamily housing builds. So let's say I don't know, we'll say my business was not even durable goods, like a service. I would still be tracking housing because I know that, or I would be tracking, a similar one I could be tracking would be money supply. Granted, I think the Fred, they discontinued M2, but there's another way you can look at that amount of monetary policy stimulus. In any case, that first mover will tell you what's going to be happening in that manufacturing market. And then, of course, a good way of tracking manufacturing is by looking at something like the PMI. But that PMI is obviously going to be interlinked with housing. So in my opinion, it's like, yeah, you could look at the PMI, or you could look at something that moves even well in advance of the PMI. Because the PMI started declining, in October and November? Like, when I say declining, I mean going into contractionary level.
Right.
In October and November. But you could see the signs, the distress signs in the housing market as soon as April and May, when the Federal Reserve started lifting their interest rates. So, in my book, I got hired at Deacero in mid-April. I told them, hey guys, I think a housing recession is likely, just given that they are going to be increasing interest rates. But I was like a 50-50. And then after their meeting in, I believe it was May, I was like, guys, we're not going to avoid this. There's going to be a recession. And every single time I've met now with the team, I'm like, well, there's some even worse news. Now they kind of don't even want to hear from me because they're like, I don't want to hear the doom and gloom lady that's about to tell us why our markets are declining.
Yeah, it's fascinating how often people would rather have their head in the sand and hope for the best. But as we all know, hope is not a strategy. And so telling them news, even when it's difficult, I think is so vital. Now, what the leadership tends to do with that news, that's really up to them. But really, this leads very well into kind of my next question that I had for you, which is, how does Deacero utilize your internal reporting? You had mentioned, you actually share it with the sales team, some of the insights that you generate, and they maybe take those to customers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's twofold. There's the communication piece. So like our CEO, because it's a Deacero group, which includes USA, Mexico, Latin America, and affiliates, so acquisitions. Every quarter they have board meetings where they basically check in with every CEO and ask, how's the business performance doing? So
right.
For that piece of my job, I'm basically the glorified PowerPoint curator, where I'm feeding him the market intelligence, I'm feeding him market sizing information, market share information, how we performed on a sales basis, and how our projects are going. That gets funneled up to the president of our company, so he gets to see that information. But to your point, we're also having monthly meetings as a sales-wide team, where that includes senior line managers, so basically division leads, as well as their frontline managers. They're on that call to hear kind of market insights. What happened is one of the frontline managers really took a keen interest in what I was presenting and said, honestly, these are the type of conversations I'm having with customers. It's just we don't have an informed conversation about it. We're just kind of exchanging notes like, yeah, it seems like there's more permits nowadays, or, it kind of seems, well, they'll know like the Wall Street Journal frontline, they did more rate hikes, so that doesn't bode well for us. They know like the kind of cliff notes, the very, very high level, but they don't have time to pool all this information, to pool graphs and, kind of create their own PowerPoint. So one of our frontline managers came to me and said, hey, Maddie, like as part of my strategy, I would really appreciate if you could just put together, and it actually stemmed from, he was going to see a large client, wanted to look impressive to this large client, and said, can you feed me some charts and some questions to make me go into this informed? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I sent him 5 charts and I sent him 5 questions. And I said, if you present this, this is what I would ask them. And he told me right away, right after that meeting, that it went really well because they appreciated the intelligence we were sharing. And they also appreciated that, they had a customer of theirs that was trying to be nimble and follow what the market was going to do, as opposed to kind of being like, well, it's up in the air. We'll see what happens. And he said, why don't we take this exact approach? And when we go out to new customers, we can hand them either if it's, if they're more of a sophisticated younger person, send them a slide deck, or if they're a little bit older, print out flyers, have a little snapshot on your background, Maddie, and talk about the partnership, because we actually have, because we're a lot larger in Mexico, we hired basically the Janet Yellen of Mexico on our team.
Wow.
His name is Jose de la Cruz. He's extremely talented. I'm so lucky that I get to work with this guy. But it's very interesting because he knows economics super well, but he doesn't have the U.S. understanding of, all the like political headwinds and, like kind of the government policies through which things are pushed. So I'll tell him about that data. And then he has basically a neural network based forecasting program that he runs to give us our forecasts. And what I'll do is I'll take those forecasts and weight them by end use market to generate product family specific forecasts.
Wow.
So that's kind of the partnership. Like that's something we didn't do before. We didn't have someone devoted in the US to help him to actually leverage his intelligence and communicate it back to our team because there wasn't someone devoted in that role. So now that person is me, very lucky in that way. But now I can, because, I have my communication skills, I can then kind of take that megaphone and send it and launch it to our sales reps. And that's a piece that I find is usually missing, is usually you'll have someone who's really good on the data front, but not a good connector piece with sales. And I saw this like at the last organization I worked at, like you have really capable economic analysts, but not always partnering with sales. And if you can bridge that gap and actually create some synergies there, there's a lot of exchange of information that can happen and to a beautiful extent. And that's why I'm really excited about doing this. So I'm currently curating our first quarter deck that we'll be sending out to prospective customers to kind of spool up alliances.
I think it sounds fantastic. I mean, honestly, I think it's a pretty high bar to have a neural network based forecasting model,
that's above my pay grade. Yeah, I'm not.
Most of the listeners of this podcast are not likely to develop one of those in the immediate future, maybe long-term plans, but certainly this advice that you give about connecting the big picture macro and micro view to the trenches. Your salespeople are on the ground with customers, feeling the pulse of the market, and having a bridge between those two things to facilitate information flow, both directions, right? From the theoretical to the practical, and from the practical back into the world of theory. I think it's just phenomenal, and I think that companies should replicate this model every chance they get because there's really nothing to lose here. It's only insights to gain. I think that that's fantastic, and you're clearly leading in this area. Let's take it down a level and say, okay, we've got market sizing data. You talked about some forecasts. How do you actually benchmark your performance at the product line level and for the company as a whole? And then figure out things like market share information and kind of, are you gaining or losing in the marketplace? What's driving your performance? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the biggest, I would say my biggest areas of weak points is that market sizing. That's something I haven't done before. And the thing that I think is very frustrating about it is with economic data, you get a number, you know the number, you explain the number. With market sizing, you have to build in all these assumptions And by the time you build in all those assumptions, it's very hard to have the same exact confidence as you would when you present high-level macro insights to micro-specific insights. And I don't want to be someone who's, garbage in, garbage out, because that's not helpful for the team either. That said, I've had to kind of get over that hurdle of, it's just going to be garbage. You got to throw that out. Like, you have to somehow build some assumptions and generate something. Once you generate it, then it's your time to then piggyback with your sales team and ask them, does that sound realistic? Like, you're going to know that market a lot more than I am to be able to gauge it one way or another. So as an example, I've been doing this exact exercise with our nail manufacturing product family. And so I met up with that sales team, and it's amazing the insights that the individual sales reps have. Like, they could tell me how many nails are used per new pallet. They could tell me how many pallets are created each year. They would be able to tell me how many truckloads that is, and then distinguish by truckload how many tons are in a truckload. I don't know all of those details, but they're giving me very precise numbers, like 19.61 tons per truckload. So I'm just, doing my little math, and this is simple math. Like, I'm not talking like you're doing like extensive derivatives here. No, this is just pure multiplication. But I arrive at a number. I get, with our sales performance analytics teams, they just track, what we're selling each month. So they tell me what the average tonnage was per month throughout the year of 2022. Numerator over denominator, get my percent of market share. Now, for a family like that, we actually have significant market share. We have, almost 40 to 50%, depending on how we're doing in the year. For other families, say something like the rebar market, which is such a huge market, and we just penetrated maybe the last few years, we might have 2% of the entire market. So it's really hard to see how you fluctuate. And so our CEO has been pushing me, Maddie, it's great. We've got this calculation. I want you to go one step further. Tell me our market share by state. That is the next, kind of iteration of exercise that obviously makes sense, but also places another boundary, which is now you have to somehow figure out how to take maybe a nationwide metric and divide it by 50. And so one way I've been doing it is the National Association of Manufacturers. They have manufacturing output by state. I'll use that for any manufacturing specific thing. If it's more consumer related, you can look at the personal consumption expenditures data, pull that. If it's something like non-residential, we're very fortunate. There's plenty of sources on construction trends to tell you, the size or the spending by state for each of those markets. But it's not perfect, and I don't know how anyone would be able to do that exercise with any lick of confidence without collaborating with your sales team on it, especially if you do have very nuanced product. Maybe if it's a standardized product that's very commonly known, you might be able to, and that's one thing we've been going to, is like there's a couple associations. One of them is the AWPA, American Wire Producers Association. There's the MSCI, which I think is like Merchant Bars and Beams. There's the Concrete Reinforcement Steel Institute. So there's a lot of associations that you can become members of, and they'll track that membership data, and you can use that. If you don't have that, you're going to have to do some proxy of a macroeconomic calculation coupling with sales-specific information to derive something.
It has to be, you have to go into this exercise understanding, as you said, that it's not going to be 100% correct, right? So I come from a background in market research. I spent about a decade doing highly granular market studies on various industrial product markets, whether it's machinery manufacturers, or if you get down to the product level, PLCs, electric motors, variable frequency drives. And it's an iterative process. You do have to start with some assumptions and then take your output to the marketplace and get feedback on it. In your case, you're doing it with your sales team. In the market research world, we went directly to the participants in the studies and asked them, do you feel like this is right or not? And we would start being off probably by a factor of 25 or 30%. But over time, you refine it, you tweak it, and your understanding of where you are relative to what the markets are doing improves, and you have more confidence in terms of delivering that information with a higher degree of accuracy, and that it's more actionable because it's closer to reality, right? So I think it should not be a detriment to someone. It shouldn't hold somebody back to say, we might do this and get it wrong. Yes, you will get it wrong, but as long as you commit to it and have someone responsible for doing it over time, you'll improve, and therefore you'll be able to refine the data and make it more accurate. And eventually you will be close enough to where it's statistically significant and correct. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would. And I would stress the thing our organization lacked on is they would do like one-off calculations, and they wouldn't document the assumptions that they used for the first iteration. I mean, they would have general sources and tell you, I use this report, that report, and this one. But if you don't, I always think like if you're in that role, you kind of have to be able to create a systematic process. And that's not able to be duplicated if you don't really have a roadmap of how you generated that number. So yes, whoever is in that position or assigned that task, it is very important that they document not only the assumptions, but their sources and then how they arrived at those calculations, and stress to that organization, hey, it costs, say, I don't know, 25 grand for us to get to this number. So if we want to keep this exercise up, we need to allocate at least $25,000 in our budget every year if we're going to be able to duplicate this reporting. Because that's another thing I'm now landing on is I don't always know the budget at which I get to play with. So do I generate these numbers and it not be quite as, tangible, or do I start with a firm number and go from there? And so I would say that is another little caveat or asterisk to put to that process.
You're absolutely right. So in the world of market research, there's a funny saying that basically alludes to the fact that a lot of times individual businesses will buy third-party market studies just so they can sit on their desk until their boss questions their own internal assumption, and then they can bring this report into the boss's office and say, see, this independent provider of information agrees with what I've been telling you this whole time, right? But to your point, it costs money to have that kind of access to reliable data, and the resources that those organizations throw at the marketplace is not something that an individual like yourself could ever possibly hope to bring to bear on scale, in terms of looking at multiple markets and so on. This is phenomenal stuff, and I'm so glad that our audience is getting to hear it directly from, I'll call you the woman of steel, right? You're not quite the man of steel, but you're doing all of it in the steel industry. Woman of steel is your new nickname, Maddie. All right, let's wrap this up by looking at the piece of your business that continues and will likely remain a challenge for some time to come, which is the talent piece, right? Yep. So tell me a little bit about how you develop or you help develop your company's labor market strategies, whether it's succession planning or other people-oriented data, and then how do you relate them to long-term projects within the business to maximize the odds of success?
Yeah, so for starters, one thing I always would give whenever I did my macroeconomic webinars, granted I did those 2021, 2022, I would bang on the tables. Talent strategy, hire people, pay them well, it's going to be more beneficial, long term, you can grow competencies, you can have you can have all these, it's kind of I don't know if you've ever heard this, Alex, keystone habits, or habits that unlock the ability to unlock other things. That's the way I think about talent. It's it's kind of do you exercise, yes or no? And if you exercise, you're going to be healthier, you're going to be more motivated, and that's going to let you do boom, 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 and conquer way more in your day. Same kind of principle with regard to people in your organization. So I started with that, and to stress that point, I pooled so we've got a couple manufacturing facilities in the U.S. One is in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and one is in Houston, Texas. We also have a macro hub in Laredo, Texas. So I pulled each of those manufacturing footprints, and I looked at the talent competitiveness of those areas. There's actually a company you told me about, Alex, called Lightcast. I believe one of our buddies, Chris, he now works at Lightcast, but phenomenal group of researchers. And they did this work and provided it for free. It did not cost me anything. I just typed in the zip code. They did it for micropolitan areas as well as metro areas, as well as like teeny tiny county level areas. So you could look at CBSA codes or MSA codes and pop in your code and see what you're looking at. And for Poplar Bluff, Missouri, as well as Houston, Texas, specifically the spot in Houston that we have a facility in, they, out of like, let's say 1 is like you're in first place and 10 is like last place, we were 9 out of 10 in each of those regions. And I said, wow, look, it is what it is, but better to know that we're basically in a terrible situation and we're going to really need to do whatever's possible to retain and attract talent. And shortly after I started, one of the guys in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, when I came to visit, he was like, they were touting that they had paved the parking lot. And I was like, what do you mean you paved the parking lot?
That's a high bar.
Right. For years, we have complained because this was a gravel parking lot. And as soon as you got to the facility, everybody would be coated in, like the cement dust or the gravel dust. And on every labor survey, the first thing that was always the line item for what could be improved was paving the parking lot. And wow, they finally did it. And mentally, I'm like, okay, we are so far behind the 8 ball. If that's the thing that is going to really motivate our workforce, like that's a very low hanging fruit. We can, now we need to start thinking like long term, like how do we tie compensation to the amount of years you're in the organization? Do we tie it to, different KPIs? Like, how do we motivate people to stay here? How do we, kind of create a team atmosphere? I will say the one thing was unilaterally missing is and a lot of the guys, because it's construction, manufacturing, and agriculture are our end use markets, those tend to be senior sales reps, 60s. Some of them might even be in their early 70s. I mean, they're about to retire. So right. I started pushing, hey, we've got to somehow get them to hire new people and allow that knowledge transfer to happen before they do retire. So it's another thing I was pushing. But within our projects, all of our projects, I included HR and basically a human resources and talent strategy line item that has each of the sales divisions ask what do they need, by when do they need it, and communicate with our recruiting team to try and start with a roadmap at the beginning of the year to fill those positions, as opposed to, oh, it's middle of the year, I really need another sales rep. Well, if we tell our recruiting team in advance, they can, start with a posting and kind of survey. So we've now implemented talent strategy within our projects. So we've got like 17 projects within our sales team. Each one of those has that component embedded within it. I unfortunately got the flip side of kind of feeling what it's like when there isn't a succession plan. I had a really talented boss, super sharp guy. He had worked in the organization for almost 20 years. He knew the ins and outs. He helped kind of set up everything within our team. And he got a promotion to corporate. And so he got tapped for a higher role. We didn't have anyone on the team there's no one that will exist to replicate this person. And I think that's an important thing, is that organizations map out those people who are basically like, that that they're worth their weight in gold. Of course, every person, theoretically, you're paying them because they're giving you more value than what you're paying out. That's by definition how companies make money and how they profit.
Right.
But there's some people who are really moving the needle. And for those people to have to either record what they do, document what they do, because when he got tapped, granted, it was a 2-month transfer process, but it just wasn't enough time. And to basically create a repository of learning management systems, if you will, so that should that person leave, it's not like you literally lost their brain. You have components by which you can then build off of. Now, we're very lucky that this is a very generous individual who's, telling us, on the drop of the hat, you need something, you call me, even if I can't make it, I'll call you after hours, I'll figure it out. But you don't always get that person. And so it's very important that, like I said, you either, number one, you create that talent strategy embedded within your projects. Number two, you kind of create repositories of information. And number three, you constantly monitor kind of what the landscape you're competing in. And so I also pool wage data because I'm telling them we have to be competitive. It's not enough to just say, oh, we're paying market rate. No, that's if we want to be the best, we gotta kind of put forth that out there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's just treasure in what you've been saying for the last hour or so. I'm so glad that you came on and shared your insights. Our next guest is actually going to be someone that works specifically around compensation analysis, and they have a great platform. I can't wait to share it with our listeners. But I think that you're absolutely right. A committed talent strategy at every organizational level. Succession planning is an absolute must. A capture or a repository of the wealth of knowledge that's certainly going to be leaving the industry because not only of the ongoing retirement of the baby boomers, but because people are going to change jobs and you're going to lose some of those talented individuals. So like in your case, yes, you got very lucky that he remained within the organization and made himself available. Many times that doesn't happen and people go abroad, sometimes to a leading competitor, and therefore tell them how bad you are at the talent side so that they can come and recruit from your organization, right? So this talent analytics game is, I think, kind of the new frontier as we look out in terms of the rest of this decade and beyond, in terms of how companies can be competitive and really rise head and shoulders above their peers in their industry and in the economy in general. So with that, I recognize I've taken a lot of your time, but thank you so much, Maddie, for being here. Really appreciate your insights. And to all of you out there listening, thanks for joining us today and look forward to the next exciting episode of 3DM the podcast coming soon. Have a great day.